Good evening, boxing fans, and welcome back. Am I the only one who remembers when former longtime heavyweight contender Andrew Golota appeared as a guest on the Conan O'Brien show?
Why do you think it happens so often? People want to know, why do you think the low blows happen so often? Is that part of your training, or is that something?
Sometimes the referee doesn't react, as he's supposed to. You're supposed to cover yourself,
Right. So wait, it's his responsibility to would you put a frying pan down there? I don't.
Let me tell you something, Give me a few times real bad, I didn't cry.
You thought that maybe that they went too far, that the fight should have gone on. Is that how you feel, that the fight should have kept going?
I think he looked for a way out, not me.
Wait, he was raising his genitalia as he was fighting you? Well, I don't understand. What? Is that a system of fighting? Every time you went to hit him, he went, whoa! Is that, I'm not... I would love to be at that training camp,
This is Rummy's Corner. So if there's one boxer out there whose career and life story would make for an interesting Hollywood blockbuster film type of situation, I don't think you need to look any further than Andrew Golota. After winning the bronze medal for Poland in the heavyweight division in 1988, which was the same year that Lennox Lewis defeated Riddick Bowe for the gold medal in the super heavyweight division, it wasn't too long after that Golota would flee Poland, something about a bar brawl and him wanting to avoid prosecution there. He came over to America, and his goal at the time originally was to become a truck driver. It wouldn't be long after that, however, when Golota would turn back to boxing, and ultimately he would make his professional debut back in 1992. And he started piling up some wins. I'm not exactly sure what the chronology is, but in the early parts of Golota's career, I know he hooked up with Sam Colonna as his first American trainer, and I know eventually he hooked up with Main Events and Lou Duva, where he worked a lot with Roger Bloodworth, who, in my opinion, is a very underrated trainer. But in any case, Golota, he started piling up the wins, and for those of you old enough to remember, Golota started making a bit of a name for himself on USA Tuesday Night Fights, an absolute relic from the past that I'm sure brings many boxing fans old enough a sense of nostalgia. But then the one fight that Golota had on Tuesday Night Fights that really stood out among the others in the early parts of his professional career when he was beginning to get exposure, that came on May 16th, 1995, when Golota took on Samson Bowe. At the time, Golota was ranked number 6, I think it was by the IBF. He was 23-0 with 20 knockouts, big strong guy, but largely untested at this point. And in Bowe, who came in at a career high 287, Bowe was known as a pretty good young puncher at the time. So anyway, the fight starts. You got these two big guys here, both known to have big punches, both on their way up, looking for a break. And then in the third round, Golota got to Bowe and he dropped him. And I think he dropped him like 3 different times during this third round. Technically, I don't think Bowe actually went down on any of them. I think they were all standing 8 counts. But Golota was landing these shots, Bowe was defenseless, and he was kind of just bending forward, not going down, and Golota on occasion would still wail away at him. Anyway, it was a very peculiar round, but it looked like Bowe was overmatched by Golota. And then in the next round, out of nowhere, Bowe rocks Golota, and he rocks Golota really badly. And Golota, all of a sudden, he looks like he's in big trouble. Bowe is fired up, he's launching big shots at Golota, and then all of a sudden, Golota comes in and he bites Bowe on the neck like a vampire, digging right into his neck. And this slowed Bowe down. The referee didn't see it. The commentators on USA Tuesday Night Fights picked up on it. But Golota bites him, he's badly hurt. Bowe was rocking him that round. The next round happens, you're not sure what to expect, and I think Bowe kind of gassed himself out with that attack and the assault he had in the 4th round, which was largely deflated, I'm sure, by the fact that his opponent bit him on the neck. So Bowe gassed out. Golota, to his credit, he recovered and recuperated and regained his composure, and he started wailing on Bowe again, and Bowe was too tired at this point. The fight was over, but you got that bizarre situation where Golota bit his opponent.
There's Bowe rocking Golota.
And it looks like a bite on the neck.
So with the backing of Main Events and Lou Duva, Golota would get a chance on a bigger stage when he was in the headline bout on HBO's Night of the Young Heavyweights, March 15th, 1996. And this was just a great event that HBO had, showcasing a bunch of young heavyweights on the rise during an era where the heavyweight division was extremely interesting. And the televised portion of this card featured 3 fights. In the first fight, Shannon Briggs was upset in a 3rd round stoppage loss against Darrell Wilson. Shannon Briggs was a guy being highly touted at the time. He had a big punch, he had charisma. You also had the infamous fight where David the Terminator Tua would stop John Ruiz in 19 seconds. Tua came out like a ball of fire and unleashed a furious attack. It was a destruction win for David Tua against John Ruiz. And it's also worth noting that on the undercard, the untelevised undercard of this event, Michael Grant beat Corey T-Rex Sanders by 2nd round stoppage. I mentioned this fight because these 2 guys come into play later on in our story. But in the headline event, we have Golota taking on the Emmanuel Stewart trained protege, Donnell Doc Nicholson. So in round 1, Doc Nicholson comes out and he starts beating Andrew to the punch and winning the battle of the jabs. He's more active, he's getting off first, and he looks very good and he looks very typical of what an Emmanuel Stewart trained heavyweight looked like at the time. Now this was before Emmanuel obviously had his long runs with Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko. But even at this time, Stewart was known as a guy to have a lot of success with heavyweight boxers, including when he trained Oliver McCall in his victory over Lennox, and when he trained Evander Holyfield in his victory over Riddick Bowe. In any case, Nicholson came out and he looked really good and really sharp in the 1st round. The 2nd round, Golota turned the tables a little bit and he landed a nice left hook, started picking his spots better, and started working his way into the fight. And by the 4th round, Golota had really started beating Doc up. And Donnell Nicholson looked like he was really uncomfortable in there. Golota was getting off his jab. He was sneaking in a left hook now and then. He was landing some really good right hands behind the jab. And then in the 5th round, with just over a minute to go, out of nowhere, Golota's winning the fight, he's doing well, and he headbutts Nicholson. And this was a real hard battering ram type headbutt. So Golota, inexplicably, even though he's winning the fight and seems to be in control comfortably, so Doc goes back to his corner. And never before do I ever remember seeing Emmanuel Stewart so fired up, including when he was yelling at Lennox Lewis years later in his bout with Mike Tyson. I mean, Emmanuel just flipped out on Doc.
You're not fighting, that's why you're learning you can take my weight. Go for him. Just jump into the man and give it up. It's not even a good fight. You just out here ducking and weaving. Go to him. When the rest of people got to fight. If you get knocked out, but you had to fight like a bitch. Go ahead. Get out and fight him. You gotta kill him now, ducking and weaving and bobbing and weaving. You can't fight him, baby. Okay, I tell you. You can't fight him, baby. Let's push him down here. You dog this man. You can knock him, baby. To the point where you respecting him. That man is so ordinary, it's a joke. You gonna look at this shit and kill yourself. Push him, dog him. You just you did with Jesse Ferguson. You're getting to be like a little bitch. Fight him then, check.
Doc seemed to respond to Emmanuel's fire in between rounds, and it seemed to fire Doc up because in round 6, it was a fast start to the round. But then in the 7th round, Golota turned the tides again. He regained authority of the fight. He started taking control of the range, and he started landing his jab, and he started landing some big punches. And by this point in the fight, you could tell that Nicholson was hurt. You could tell that he was getting tired. I'm sure that vicious headbutt didn't do him any good. The fire he had from Emmanuel's pep talk earlier, it seemed to have faded and vanished away. And Golota really started beating him up, and this continued in the 8th round, which continued to be another very dominant round for Andrew Golota. Ultimately, Emmanuel Stewart jumped in and had the fight stopped after round 8. It was a good call by Emmanuel. This victory as the headline feature on HBO's Night of the Young Heavyweights, this opened up a huge opportunity for Andrew Golota. And the next time we would see him would be on a Thursday night in July 1996, when he would take on the man that was considered by many at that point to be the best heavyweight in the world, despite not being champion, Riddick Big Daddy Bowe. And at this time, the debate went on, usually surrounded 3 fighters at this time: Mike Tyson, Riddick Bowe, and Lennox Lewis. Those were the 3 names kind of shuffling around for heavyweight dominance. And this was a Thursday night fight. And I can't believe that HBO stopped doing intro promos like this one right here that they did at the beginning of the broadcast of Bowe Golota 1, July 11th, 1996.
Hey, Ralph, you got any suntan lotion?
Here you go, Charlie.
Thanks, pal.
You gonna watch the fight tonight?
Oh, I don't know. I'm kind of in the doghouse these days.
What'd you chew this time? Another one of those Gucci loafers?
It was a belt, not a shoe.
Hey, lighten up, Charlie. Boy, that garden's gonna be hot tonight.
Oh, doggone right it will be.
How about that Big Daddy Bowe?
Oh, he's all bark, no bite.
Come on, Charlie. Didn't you see Big Daddy's last fight? In the 6th round, he gets knocked down for the first time in his career, and then comes back to knock out Holyfield.
Hard right hand inside by Holyfield, and now down goes Evander.
Charlie, when Big Daddy fights, anything can happen.
Well, hot dog. So, who's Big Daddy fighting?
Oh, this wild dude, Andrew Golota, never lost a fight in his career. He'll do anything to win. Get a load of this, Charlie. Golota once bit his opponent on the neck. And in his last fight, he used his head to win in more ways than one.
Oh, he'll punch you, he'll bite you, he'll butt you.
And they think we're dangerous.
Charlie, this is gonna be a real dogfight.
Whatever you say, Ralph. How about another salty dog?
Oh, Charlie, you ain't nothing but a hound dog.
Now, I have no idea what kind of good drugs went into the creative processes that constructed that brilliant gem of a spot to introduce the fight card. But I liked it. I wish they still did them like that, and I wish they would share some of whatever the hell they were smoking.
I'm not so famous like them, but after this fight, maybe I will be.
So Wayne Kelly was the referee for this bout, and little did he know at this point he was going to have a busy night on his hands. But even before this fight started, it was already riddled with controversy. When the rounds at the last minute, it was originally supposed to be a 10-round fight. It wound up being changed to a 12-round fight. And Golota was so upset over the change that, according to the HBO commentating team, he had his bags packed. He was ready to go. He wanted no part of this. Ultimately, they persuaded Golota to fight on. I believe his own promoter paid him an extra $50,000 on top of his $600,000 purse for this fight. So the show went on, and again at this time, Riddick Bowe was widely viewed as the best heavyweight on the planet. He had just come off of a stoppage victory against his longtime rival, Evander Holyfield, actually stopping the real deal. In another competitive fight, the 3rd of their trilogy, having split the first 2 matches of that epic rivalry, Bowe entered the ring at a career high of 252.25 pounds. And right from the opening bell in round 1, Golota started out jabbing Bowe, and he was throwing all sorts of really nice short combos, and the word on Golota at this time was that he was a little slow, a little clumsy, a little stiff and upright, and that he fought in that typical stand-up European style where he was pretty robotic and not particularly athletic. But what we saw here, and what the people who watched the Nicholson fight may have had a clue on, is that Golota is actually deceptively fast, and he had good boxing skills, and he was actually a very good athlete who was this big, strong guy, and he was beating Riddick Bowe to the punch. He was out-jabbing Riddick Bowe, who at the time was viewed as having a pretty damn good jab. And this continued happening in the second round. Golota landed some good left hooks on Bowe. In the third round, it was a competitive round. More big punches being exchanged between these two guys, and Golota capped it off with a huge left hook, and he was rocking Bowe. But then he got deducted a point for a low blow, and it was a bad low blow. The next round, it was another big round for Andrew Golota. He rocked Bowe hard with all sorts of quick combinations. He was quicker to the punch. He had a better rhythm. He was exhibiting a pretty good defense with nice head movement, upper body movement. He was bending well at the waist. He was always in good punching position. He was throwing a good variety of punches, working upstairs and downstairs, and he had really good control of the range. He was dictating the range, and his longer reach was enabling him to continue beating Bowe to the jab. So in round 6, with about 30 seconds left, Golota would hit Bowe with another low blow after some vicious back and forth clubbing. He was deducted another point. This was the second point he had now lost in the fight. In round 7, it wasn't long before he was deducted a third point for low blows. Then he started dominating again for a stretch, landing short power combinations. And then Golota just couldn't seem to help himself. He landed low again in the 7th round. It was already unusual that Golota had 3 points deducted and wasn't deducted on that third low blow. But he was deducted 3 points. This 4th low blow, Wayne Kelly had seen enough. He disqualified Golota, and then the infamous riot broke out in Madison Square Garden. And without meaning to make light of the unfortunate situation, I still couldn't help being a little bit amused by the fact that a couple of the guys in the crowd were starting fights around Big George Foreman, and Big George Foreman's telling them to calm down. I mean, could you imagine going somewhere looking for trouble and then you run into Big George Foreman?
And so don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. They'll stop it. Don't. Get back. Go back where you'll see the tongue. Get on back now.
My microphone got knocked off my head.
Don't do it, son. Don't do
There's
that.
danger all over the place here. This is a very desperate situation. Lou Doof is in trouble. Lou Doof is in trouble on the ring mat.
Hey, George.
Yes.
I want to thank you for helping to keep us safe. Obviously, our viewers didn't see it, but George Foreman protected Larry Merchant and me from a lot of harm there at ringside. He kept at least 2 or 3 guys out of the ring by himself, and I pin a big Medal of Honor on George tonight. He did a big service for Larry and me and the rest around us at ringside, and for a lot of people who were over on our side of the ring. Thank you, George, for your forceful and honorable presence tonight.
In any case, at the time of the stoppage, Andrew Golota was up on all 3 of the official judges' scorecards. He was up 67-65 on 2 of the cards, 67-66 in the other card. It seemed that he threw away a sure victory, especially when you take into account all of the point deductions he had, with the unusual ending of the fight, Riddick Bowe coming in out of shape and perhaps underestimating Andrew Golota, and then the unfortunate riot that broke out at the end of the fight. All of the pieces were in place for a very intriguing rematch proposition. So Bowe and Golota would have their rematch on December 14th, 1996. Fel Torrance came in and replaced longtime Hall of Fame trainer Eddie Futch as the main man for Riddick Bowe. Bowe came in this time at 235 pounds, which was a good fighting weight for him. Not the flabbier version of Bowe we had seen a few months earlier, who had come in at a career high. Now, one of the things I always found interesting and kind of funny about the rematch was Lou Duva making the special trunks for Andrew Golota that he put on the heavy bag. And I don't know shit about boxing now, and I didn't know shit about boxing then. But I remember just thinking, wow, this seems like a peculiar training method in order to keep and prevent Golota from throwing low.
So the punches are going to be coming up here. They're going to be hitting him on the chin. They're going to be hitting him in the chest. They're going to be hitting him in the body. They're going to hit me there. Over here, we've taught Andrew to keep away. This is a no zone over here.
So this was a very dramatic, intense fight, even right from the opening, from the ring entrances. It was like something out of a movie. And Riddick Bowe, he came out to Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. And Golota came out, as was his tradition around this time, to the Polish national anthem. And the police presence around both of the fighters as they entered the ring, it acted as a visual reminder of the chaos that erupted the first time these two guys fought. So at the beginning of the fight, Golota came out again and established a more dominant jab in the battle of the jabs. He was doubling the jab up. He was sometimes tripling the jab up. Round 1 of Bowe Golota 2 looked an awful lot like round 1 of Bowe Golota 1. And in round 2, Golota continued his dominance. And he knocked Bowe down in this round. It was a right hand followed by a clubbing left that Golota threw that hit Bowe like right above his ear. Bowe looked like his equilibrium had totally abandoned him. He kind of had like a delayed reaction where he went crashing down to the canvas. And then Bowe got up and bravely fought on. He was showing a lot of heart as he underwent a really mean barrage of punches from Andrew Golota. I mean, Golota was just throwing everything at Bowe. And Bowe was bravely trying to fight back and defend himself, throwing shots here and there. But Golota's assault was absolutely relentless. But Bowe wasn't going anywhere. Bowe was absorbing all of this punishment right after he had been knocked down. And then Golota reverts to something we had seen before back when he faced Doc Nicholson. He just seemed to lose it for a second there, and he unleashed another one of those battering ram type headbutts. And referee Eddie Cotton, he deducted a point from Golota for the flagrant headbutt. Golota had really been laying it on Bowe. He gave Bowe a chance to recover, so Golota lost a point. And he also seemed to suffer a cut, so it worked against him in all sorts of ways. And then in the third round, Bowe managed to turn everything into an inside fight. And this is where Golota in his encounters with Bowe really seemed to struggle the most. When they were in tight quarters, Bowe was a really good inside fighter, and he was landing some good uppercuts. He started taking control of the fight, and it looked like Golota had suddenly lost all that momentum he had. And in the fourth round, Bowe continued to keep it a nice inside scrap, and then he dropped Golota with a series of punches. There may have been some rabbit punches in there, but he was hitting Golota. Golota was on the verge of going down and eventually did go down as Bowe continued his assault. Golota got up, blood gushing out of his eye, and this thing started looking like a Rocky movie. And even Jim Lampley, a couple of times throughout the broadcast, he'd compared it, I think, to Rocky twice and to a heavyweight Hagler Hearns at another point. So when Golota got up with the blood gushing, he threw a low blow, and he was warned for throwing that low blow. And then not long later, as Bowe continued trying to go after him and trying to go in for the finish to see if he could get Golota out of there, Golota threw another low blow. And this time, Eddie Cotton took another point from him. So now he'd lost the second point. He lost the one earlier for the headbutt, and now this one for the low blow. At one point during one of the rounds, I remember Roger Bloodworth and Lou Duva, they were going nuts begging Golota to throw nothing but headshots.
I want all straight punches, and goddammit, step the jab in. No more body punches.
You gotta go to the head with this guy. Uppercuts and go to the head with this guy. Straight right hands, you can't miss him. And come back with the left hook. That's all you gotta do.
He's shot.
And this fight was really turning into something else. It continued in the fifth round, where Golota all of a sudden turned the tables again and regained control of the action. And he did this by dictating the range and reestablishing his jab. When Bowe was out at the end of his punches, Golota was dominating the action with his jab. And then he unleashed one of the most vicious combinations, upstairs and downstairs. Bowe was helplessly against the ropes, and Golota continued battering him as he started falling down, timbering his way forward, and Bowe looked wasted. He looked really badly hurt. It looked as if the fight was gonna end. Golota went on to continue ruthlessly battering Riddick Bowe, who bravely withstood somehow all of this punishment and was still trying to fight back. It was just an amazing display of will from Bowe and an amazing, relentless assault from Golota. So Golota continued to dominate the action. Occasionally, Bowe would land a big right hand out of nowhere. Golota would usually answer with some nice work of his own. And then in round 9, where it looked like Golota couldn't lose this fight, Riddick landed a really big counter right hand. It was one of those shots that came out of nowhere, but this one hurt Golota. And you could tell by his reaction that he did not like getting hit by that shot. And at this point, Riddick Bowe was so battered and bruised that I don't think he even really realized that he had hurt Golota. But Golota's whole mannerism changed, and then the round seemed to be closing to an end, and then it came. The 3-punch low blow combo. The third one looked like an uppercut inexplicably. I mean, this was one of the most vicious low blow assaults that I could remember in boxing. The only thing that came close was years later, where poor King Kong Ekbeko was getting battered by Abner Mares. This was a bad series of low blows, leaving Eddie Cotton no choice but to disqualify Golota. Once again, Golota was up on all 3 of the official judges' scorecards. He was up 75-71, 75-73, and 74-72. And once again, Golota appeared to give away what was an almost certain victory against Riddick Bowe. And it was just such a baffling ending. It was such a good fight, such a good war, so much back and forth action. And then the way it ended, with the repeated low blows, a complete replay of their first fight, where Golota clearly proved he was the better boxer inside the ring, but he couldn't secure the victory. And it was just baffling that this would happen again. And after the fight, Riddick Bowe, this would basically be the last fight of Riddick Bowe's career, but after the fight, Golota's manager, Lou Duva, this is what he had to say.
I don't know what to say, I really don't. I'm going to sit down with Andrew and say, look, do you want to be a fighter or don't you want to be a fighter? If you don't want to be the fighter that fights in the ring and fights the right way, then you better go look for a championship of a tough man contest in a bar or something like that, because it's not going to happen.
So after the 2 Bowe fights, it would be a while before we would see Golota in action again. And originally he was supposed to fight Merciless Ray Mercer on May 16th, 1997. But Golota had to pull out of that fight with an injury. I believe it was a back injury. So that bout got rescheduled for August 16th. But this time Mercer had to pull out due to an injury. He had injured his neck, and this injury was going to require surgery. So then Golota and Mercer got canceled ultimately. And Golota's next fight, after losing twice to Riddick Bowe, he was rewarded with a shot at WBC heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis. And Lennox at this time was still a fairly new duo with Emmanuel Stewart. We didn't know how much Emmanuel may have improved him. His previous 2 fights were a rematch against Oliver McCall, where McCall probably shouldn't have been fighting that night, and he had a bit of a breakdown in the ring. And then after that, Lewis had the fight against Huggin Henry Akinwande, and Akinwande was disqualified for excessive holding. So these 2 fights were lackluster, disappointing type of fights, through no fault of Lewis's necessarily, but they weren't particularly good fights. And meanwhile, Golota had beaten the shit out of the guy that most people considered to be, at that point, the best heavyweight in the world. And going into the Golota-Lewis bout, it may be difficult to comprehend now. And I think the great Larry Merchant said it best, and what Larry said, this viewpoint was held by an awful lot of people in the boxing world.
And you've heard of lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, here's an example, because Lewis doesn't throw the kind of jab that Golota does. Golota has a jolting jab, perhaps the best jab we've seen in the heavyweight division since Larry Holmes. Lewis generally paws with his jab.
So Lennox Lewis opened as a favorite in this bout, but I think as the fight came closer, it was pretty much a pick'em fight. And a lot of people in the boxing world thought that Golota was going to beat Lennox Lewis. And watching Lennox come into the ring that night, personally, I don't ever remember seeing him look more loose, more relaxed, and more fired up all at the same time as he did during his ring walk for that fight with Andrew Golota. Golota and Lewis, the fight's about to begin and they have this stare down. And as far as stare downs go, especially at this time, this was some pretty intense stuff. So the fight starts and there's a lot of tension and Golota's not doing much. He doesn't seem to be coming out with the same type of aggression he normally does, and especially as he did in his 2 previous bouts with Bowe. Lewis is slowly measuring him, on top of his game, looking really fast, looking really relaxed. Golota gets him into a corner, Lewis gets out of it, Golota didn't really throw much, and then Golota gets caught by a right hand followed by a left hook that really seemed to hurt him. Golota's wobbling and he backs into a corner and Lewis follows in for the kill. And Lewis's punches were so powerful and so accurate, one after another landing straight on Golota's jaw right between the guard. And Golota crumbles down. And before the fight had even started, it already looked like it was over. And Golota got up and he was really wobbly, and then Lewis pounced in for the kill. Lennox was a big, powerful heavyweight who was a really good finisher. He came in, he just picked up where he'd left off, started battering Golota again. Golota crashed to the canvas and that's it. The fight was over. So Golota got blown away. And the implications of this in the aftermath, the new common narrative became, well, Riddick Bowe was clearly shot, Golota was never that good to begin with, and that's why Lennox Lewis blew Golota away. I reject that point of view. I think that does Lewis a great disservice. Golota was still a very formidable foe going in, and I happen to believe this is one of the absolute best wins in the career of Lennox Lewis. I think he may have been in his absolute athletic prime, as well as to the point where he really started gelling with Emmanuel Stewart's style. I mean, he looked sharp that night. And to just write that win off, I think does Lewis a disservice. So I know there were some unusual circumstances with this fight. Golota had shown up for his own fight 45 minutes late, arriving at the venue by police escort under mysterious circumstances. And then Golota was ultimately fined $5,000 by the New Jersey Athletic Commission for taking an injection of lidocaine before the fight, administered to him by a Dr. Katzman. So Golota got this painkiller that he shouldn't have gotten before the fight. He wound up suing Dr. Katzman, I think for $20-something million. Ultimately, it was settled out of court. I believe it was rumored to be for around $1 million. But there are some unusual circumstances. Regardless, none of this was any of the fault of Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis went in there like a lion that night and he took care of Golota. And this was a major setback in the career of Andrew Golota. So Golota needed to regroup, go back to the drawing board, and he started low and he began working his way back up. And I remember his first fight after Lewis, he had stopped Eli Dixon with a body shot on USA Tuesday Night Fights. And then I think he had a fight after that against Jack Bastings, a former male stripper who had a bum knee going into the fight wearing a knee brace. But then the fight where Golota really started coming back into the spotlight a little bit, another USA Tuesday Night fight, this one against Corey Sanders. No, not that Corey Sanders. Not the Corey Sanders who blasted out Vladimir Klitschko a few years later to end his first reign as a WBO title holder. Not that Corey Sanders. We're talking about Corey T-Rex Sanders. The same Corey Sanders who on the untelevised portion of Night of the Young Heavyweights had been beaten by Michael Grant in second round stoppage. So going into this fight with T-Rex, Corey seemed pretty confident going in. He mentioned that he thought Golota, again the common narrative, Golota got Bowe at the right time, Bowe was shot, and Sanders was coming in looking for a win, and he wanted to try to help elevate his own career. So this fight wound up being an interesting little fight. It had an incredible second round where Golota had hurt Sanders, and Sanders was backed into the corner and Golota was unloading on him, and it looked like it might be a second round stoppage for Andrew Golota. He was flurrying his punches. They weren't the most devastating, powerful shots, but he was throwing quick, sharp punches and short combinations, and he kept throwing. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Sanders responded, and he retaliated with some really hard shots of his own. And this second round wound up becoming quite an interesting clash of styles. Back and forth they went. Golota was mostly getting the best of the action, but T-Rex was still throwing punches of his own. It was a really incredible second round, one of the most memorable rounds from USA Tuesday night fights that I can remember. And the fight continued, and Golota, for the most part, was dominating the action, but it was a little bit of a different Andrew Golota. He was a little more measured. He was a little less aggressive. He was a little more deliberate in his pacing, where he was saving energy and not allowing himself to get into circumstances where he'd get too wild and maybe lose control. It was a disciplined effort from Andrew Golota, and he put on a good boxing performance. And while T-Rex was never a world beater in the heavyweight division, he would go on a few years later to defeat Oleg Maskiev, who himself would later go on to win a version of the heavyweight title in his very own Cinderella Man story. Golota would have a few more wins, beating guys like former heavyweight champion Tim Witherspoon, and then he would fight Jesse the Boogeyman Ferguson. And in this fight, Golota was originally scheduled to face Jimmy Thunder. And Golota and his team had prepared for the fight with Thunder, but a couple of days before the fight, 2 or 3 days before, Thunder had to pull out. And they pulled in the Boogeyman as a last-minute replacement for Thunder. And Golota was apparently distraught over this, because I guess he was preparing for Thunder, hoping he'd look good. Most observers actually felt the Boogeyman would be a more difficult challenge for Golota. And Golota went out there, and again, he showed a lot of the stuff he showed against Sanders, except he looked more disciplined and even more measured. It was another strong effort from Andrew with some disciplined boxing, and for a guy who had twice been disqualified for low blows, had bitten a fighter, had used headbutts as tactics when needed, this was all good sign for Andrew Golota, and he was slowly working his way back into contention. He'd ultimately wind up winning 6 fights in a row before he got his next opportunity on the big stage. And that came November 20th, 1999, when Golota got the chance to face Michael Grant. At this point in time, Michael Grant was widely viewed as the 3rd best heavyweight on the planet. It was around the time Lewis and Holyfield had had their rematch after their first controversial draw, and this was considered a big test for Grant. But make no mistake, Grant was expected to win this fight with Golota, and Golota was really thought to have been past the point where he would ever be on the level he was when he twice battered Riddick, Big Daddy Bowe. So for this one, for Golota, no Lou Duva in the corner, just Roger Bloodworth. Apparently Duva's animated, over-the-top mannerisms caused Golota some anxiety. Roger was a calmer presence in the corner that Golota felt more comfortable with. And at this point in time, Roger was doing a hell of a job training. He was also working with Fernando Vargas at this time, and this is somewhere around the time, I think, that Vargas would go on to have his war in a losing effort, but a brilliant war with Tito Felix Trinidad. So no Lou Duva for Golota. In the first round, the two are measuring each other up. Grant's a little bit bigger, his jab looks a little bit faster. Golota looked a little bit uncomfortable as he was trying to get Grant's rhythm down. And then Golota tried a left-left combo. And he didn't really land anything, but the whole time you could see that Michael Grant's left hand is extremely low. So Golota walks in and he does it again. Left, left, right. But this time, bang! The right hand drops Grant like a ton of bricks. And it looked like Golota could resurrect his career. So Grant got up, he had a bit of a smile on his face, he rose to his feet. Golota went after him. Toward the end of the round, Golota would throw another short combination that dropped Grant again, but I don't think anything particularly hard landed here. I think Grant was still feeling the effects from that first knockdown with that 3-punch combo that ended with that big right hand from Golota. So Golota continued doing well, and he was beating Michael Grant with basic boxing as Grant was trying to shake off the cobwebs and regain his composure a little bit. Golota was walking him down, throwing jabs, throwing right hands, and he was having some good success against Grant. And then the fight started becoming a little bit more of a roughhousing affair, and the referee, Randy Newman, was getting on Golota's case a lot. Grant was using roughhouse tactics of his own. Golota was deducted a point. He got penalized. I forget if it was for holding and hitting or if it was a low blow, but Randy Newman took a point from Golota. George Foreman, commentating for HBO, was none too happy about it. It had been a better round for Grant, but this is what George Foreman had to say on the penalty.
Golota holds his hands out as if to say, when are you going to talk to him about low blows? That one was low.
That's enough.
Hey, leave him alone, referee.
Don't start it now. Cost you more points.
The referee is unjust. It's not a fair job. This is not a good job.
That was an important round for Michael Grant.
So the start of round 4, Grant comes out and he gets deducted a point for throwing a low blow of his own. So right at the start of the round, now they're even. Golota lost a point in the 3rd, now Grant loses a point in the 4th for a low blow. And it wound up being a good Golota round again, and he was starting to outbox Grant again. Golota started doing a little bit better. He was landing his short combos that he's known for. He was working behind the jab, and while at this point in time his jab wasn't quite as snappy as the one he had shown against Riddick Bowe a few years earlier, he still was putting a good jab together, and with just over 10 seconds left in the 5th round, Grant hurt Golota and then followed things up with a nice flurry. This was Grant's first real moment of success in the fight to this point, and he definitely gave Golota something to think about. And in round 6, I thought Grant built on that momentum. I thought he started jabbing a little bit better. I thought he was being more competitive with Golota. And while there was still a lot of clinching in between the action, and there was still some roughhouse tactic stuff going on, I thought Grant was starting to make a better account of himself. And both of these guys were trying. The action was slowing down as the rounds went, and then in the 9th round it kind of broke into a wild street fight that was coming out in bursts, and they both looked tired, but they both looked intense. And then in the 10th round, right at the start of the round, Michael Grant lands a big right hand that starts a barrage of punches. And Golota was obviously really hurt by the right hand, and Grant knew it, and he jumped right on top of him. Golota covered up. He didn't try to hold on. He just kind of held his hands up, and Grant was finding openings between Golota's guard, and Golota just stood there in a guarded position without throwing anything back and without trying to hold on to stop the assault. So Golota goes down. He gets up. He looks okay. You're thinking the fight's going to continue. And then Randy Newman is asking him, do you want to fight? Do you want to fight? Do you want to fight? And Golota said no. And that's it. The fight was over. So once again, Golota seemed to throw away an almost certain victory. And at the time of the stoppage, he was ahead once again on all 3 scorecards. He was up 86-81 on 2 of the cards, 87-80 on the 3rd card. But at this point in time, the state of New Jersey had some bullshit experiment going on, what they called consensus scoring. And how it worked is, if 2 of the 3 judges gave a fighter a round, then that fighter would get the round on the consensus scorecard. And Golota was up on the consensus scorecard 86-81. Ultimately, New Jersey did away with that experiment when there was an instant, it was Vivian Harrison and Ivan Robinson, where Harris had won on all 3 judges' scorecards, but the way it worked with the consensus scoring, Harris wound up being awarded a draw, even though he had won on all 3 of the judges' scorecards. So anyway, New Jersey got rid of that stupid thing, but the point being here, Golota was up in the fight, he was winning the fight, and he didn't want to continue. And George Foreman thought that Randy Newman was giving Golota a hard time on this particular night. But at this point in time now, the 2 disqualification losses to Bowe, the quick loss 95 seconds to Lennox Lewis, and quitting against Michael Grant, things weren't looking good for Golota. So after this fight, Michael Grant would go on to lose to Lennox Lewis. It was another great win for Lewis coming off of that victory over Evander Holyfield in the rematch. And meanwhile, Golota would switch his entire team. He would get rid of Duva and Bloodworth, and he would hook up with New Jersey-based trainer, who I believe was also a tailor, Al Certo. And Certo is best known for his work with James Buddy McGirt, who was a pound-for-pound elite talent back in the 90s. So it was in late 1999, after these changes were made, that there was a rumor that Golota was going to fight one of the Klitschko brothers. Golota had agreed to fight one of the Klitschko brothers, and the report I had read, if I remember correctly, Golota quipped something to the effect that he'd agree to fight a Klitschko as long as he didn't have to fight both at the same time. But that fight never came together. Golota would never wind up fighting one of the Klitschkos, and what actually happened was Golota got into a car accident, I believe it was in December 1999. Now, I don't know the exact extent of his injuries from that car accident, but whatever the case may be, Golota's left hand was never the same after that fight with Michael Grant. Neither his jab nor his left hook ever looked the same. So in their first fight together, Golota and Al Certo, this fight actually took place in China, where Golota would take on journeyman Marcus Rody. And the thing I remember most about that fight is that Marcus Rody didn't have trunks with proper elastic on them. So his trunks kept falling down. And for anybody that's ever played the old Nintendo game Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, it was comical in the sense that it reminded me of fighting King Hippo, for those of you who remember the game. So Rody had elastic that just wouldn't hold his trunks up, and I remember in between rounds, Rody was complaining to his corner that he wanted to sit, but they wound up wrapping tape around his trunks so that his trunks wouldn't fall down. In any case, it was an early win for Golota. He would then go on to face Orlin Norris, and this was the fight against Orlin Norris where it became apparent that Golota's jab just wasn't quite what it was. And this fight led to another big opportunity for Golota, as he got to face Iron Mike Tyson on October 20th, 2000. And this is at a time when everyone assumed that Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis were on a collision course with one another, despite the fact Lennox Lewis was under contract with HBO. And despite the fact that Mike Tyson was under contract with Showtime, it was still assumed that some way or another this would eventually get worked out. Meanwhile, Golota gives them a common opponent. He hadn't looked too good, so in order to keep the plan going, it seemed like a safe opponent. And right from the start, as is typical in Golota situations, there was a bit of controversy over the gloves. And the fight wound up starting late, and if I recall watching it on the pay-per-view feed, it actually started really late. And the commission wanted Golota to wear Everlast gloves, he wanted to wear some other kind of gloves, but ultimately they got Golota to go out there and fight. And in the first round, Golota was actually doing fairly well with Tyson. After Tyson did his initial bull charge rush, Golota kind of fell into a groove, and he started jabbing, and he started throwing some short combinations, and they didn't have much on them, but Golota was throwing punches and landing, and he was kind of hanging in there with Tyson. And then Tyson started landing a few isolated right hands here and there, and then towards the end of the round, he bombed one in there, and Golota went down. But he popped up pretty quick, and he seemed to be okay, but at this point, he'd already taken quite a number of big right hands. In between rounds, Golota can be heard saying what appears to be, "Stop the fight," to his trainer, Al Certo. Meanwhile, Golota went out there. He got out there in round 2, and again, he was eating a lot of right hands. I think he may have caught a headbutt or two from Mike Tyson in that round, and he was getting hit hard, but he was in the fight, and he seemed to be able to take the punches well. And then in between rounds, Golota quit. Al Certo tried to put the mouthpiece back into Golota's mouth to get him to go back out there for the third round, and Golota had decided he had enough. And as he walked out of the ring back towards the locker room, the fans were furious. He had debris thrown on him. I think there was a red drink that hit him while he was on his exit into the locker room. I thought it was the best Mike Tyson had looked in years, but he never had the chance to bring the fight to a more natural conclusion. And while fans can be unforgiving for fighters who quit, There is a flip side to this, and people need to remember that boxing is a dangerous sport. It turned out that he suffered some pretty serious injuries, so it looked as if Golota was gone, as if this was the end. We didn't hear about him in 2001. We didn't hear about him in 2002. In fact, the next time I remember any mention of Golota on a boxing network came in May of 2003, where Golota's name was mentioned in an update on HBO's series Legendary Nights, the episode The Tale of Bowe Golota, and this is what we got to see.
Currently, Golota lives in Chicago and is facing criminal charges for a melee outside a hotel in Poland in November of 2002.
So not long after that episode aired, Golota actually did make a comeback in August of 2003 when he beat Brian Nix. And then he had another fight later that year, and he defeated Terrence Lewis. So Golota came back, had a couple of wins under his belt, and then I think it was in February of 2004 that Golota signed with promoter Don King. And signing with King immediately paid dividends for Golota, because on April 17, 2004, Golota got the call against then IBF champion Chris Bird, who was slated to face Derek Jefferson, who had suffered a cut, putting that fight out of commission, and Golota got the call. So Don King's plans for Golota got pushed forward. The fight was highly criticized. People didn't think Golota deserved a shot at Bird. The fight wound up being in Madison Square Garden, where a riot had erupted years earlier. And for most fans, because the Nix and Terrence Lewis fights weren't televised on TV, this was the first a lot of fans were seeing of Golota since he had left the ring with Mike Tyson. But what unfolded on that night was actually one of the better heavyweight fights in recent memory. And Golota put on a good show against Bird, where this cat and mouse affair unfolded, and Golota was chasing Bird down, and he was trying to club him and hit him anywhere he can. Hit him on the arms, hit him in the shoulders, hit him in the body, hit him in the face. Golota was trying to outmuscle and overpower Bird, and meanwhile Bird was picking his spots, slipping punches, doing his version of a mini rope-a-dope when he was pinned against the ropes. Golota was having moments of success. Bird was countering him, and this wound up turning into a very entertaining scrap. I thought Golota was doing better in the first half of the fight. I thought he was getting the best of Bird, and even though his jab was a far cry from what it had been years earlier against Riddick Bowe, Golota was still finding a way to work the jab and put together the short combinations that had gotten fans so interested in him 8 years earlier when he faced Riddick Big Daddy Bowe. Bird, for his part, was doing his own good work and adding to the appeal of the show, and we had an entertaining encounter here. Some very good back and forth action. As the fight progressed, the rounds became more and more difficult to score. At the end of the day, the fight was ultimately ruled a draw, in a fight that many people, myself included, felt that Andrew Golota had deserved to win. But the fight was ruled a draw. It was a split draw, 115, 113, 113, 115, 114, 114. Bird retained his IBF title, but after the bout you could see the look on Golota's face, and after all the struggles he had, being disqualified against Bowe, getting blasted out by Lewis, quitting against Grant and Tyson, and especially with the memory of Tyson, him getting pelted with debris and that red drink, you could see the look on Andrew's face. And it was the first time he had gone 12 rounds, and he held his own with a champion, and Bird was known as a frustrating type of guy. Bird tended to look good against most people, and he tended to make those people look bad against him. But Golota made a good account of himself. But for whatever reason, Don King never put a rematch together between these two. Instead, he kind of just switched things up a little bit. And on November 13th, 2004, Golota would get another shot at a heavyweight title from a Don King stable when he'd get to fight WBA champion John Ruiz. And going into this fight, Ruiz was coming off of two real stinkers against Hasim Rahman and Frezo Cuendo, with the latter being one of the worst heavyweight title fights I ever remember seeing. Ruiz, with his jab and grab style, wasn't appealing to fans. Golota was coming off of a good showing against Bird, but how would these styles clash? Ruiz fights tended not to be too entertaining, but Norman Stone would make sure that that's not the case on this night. So in round 1, Ruiz came out doing his best impersonation of Lennox Lewis. He was trying to follow the blueprint that was first set by Lennox Lewis, later followed to an extent by Mike Tyson, but Ruiz just didn't have the power, the speed, or the talent to pull it off. And in round 2, Ruiz continued being aggressive. He wasn't doing the jab and grab style that we were accustomed to, not at this point in the fight anyway. And in the second round, at one point, Ruiz threw a combination. It was a left, a right, and a left, and he was missing wildly. And Golota countered him with a sharp, short right hand that sent Ruiz right down on the seat of his ass. It was a perfectly timed punch from Golota, came right at the end of Ruiz's flurry, where Ruiz was way out of position from being over-aggressive in ways that we usually didn't see from him. And Ruiz got up, and he didn't look badly hurt, but he looked like he had definitely been a little stunned, and Golota continued after him, threw another combo. Ruiz went down again. This time Golota kind of tapped him on the back of the head as he went down. And from this point forward, after being knocked down twice by Golota, Ruiz began reverting to the jab and grab style he was infamous for. In the 4th round, Ruiz was deducted a point by Randy Newman for a bad foul where he hit Golota behind the head, but both of these guys were fighting really dirty. And then in round 5, Ruiz needed the tape fixed on his glove, and Norman Stone, when Ruiz got to the corner, he just started going wild.
All time you want.
And you stopped it! Fucking asshole! What a piece of shit you turned out to be! What a fucking piece of shit! You got no fucking balls, you cocksucker!
Boy, that's a nice way to get on the referee's right side.
And this wound up becoming one of the dirtiest fights I can ever remember seeing. There was lots of holding, lots of dirty fighting, a lot of excessive clinching from John Ruiz, and both of these guys were fighting really dirty, holding and hitting, headlocks, low blows, hitting after the bell, elbows, forearms, rabbit punching, probably a few thumbs to the eye along the way. And this trend would continue. This was a dirty fight, lots of clinches, not a lot of action, and basically for the most part, it was whoever was landing the punch in between the clinches was winning the rounds, and more often than not, that seemed to be Golota. And Norman Stone continued going wild as the fight progressed.
Going on an angle. All right? To a rhythm, John. Stop going on an angle. He ain't gonna do nothing for you. Nothing at all. You understand? He ain't gonna do nothing for you. He's for the other guy. It's a proven fact. All right? Go out and fight your fight.
It's a proven fact.
What is the referee supposed to do for the fighter?
Ref's doing a terrible fucking job, Johnny. He don't know what he's doing.
So then in the 8th round, Ruiz, the tape on his glove got messed up again, so he went to his corner, and this time, Norman Stone got thrown out by Randy Newman.
Fucking jerk off.
Okay,
That's our Stoney.
Wait a minute. He's ordering Stone out of the corner.
Harold Letterman, our in-house historian, is saying that this is unprecedented in his view. He does not remember a trainer ever being thrown out of a corner.
I'll sue you for every fucking thing you got, you fucker.
What a class act.
And so now John Ruiz will go the rest of the way, apparently, without his trainer in his corner. Because Randy Newman has banished Norman Stone.
Alex, you take over.
Let's get this one.
I'm suing him for every fucking thing he's got. Everything. What did I say to him? I didn't say a word to him.
Keep working, please.
Don't put your fucking...
I'm not putting my hands up, please.
So after that, Ruiz actually started doing better after Stone was ejected. He started landing some better shots. He landed a good shot at one point in round 10, and then at the end of the round, the 10th round, Golota appeared to knock Ruiz down at the end of the round. Or maybe he hit him after the bell. But something happened and a punch landed and Ruiz went down and no count started. Doesn't that mean there should have been a count started? or a penalty on Golota for hitting after the bell? Neither of those things happened. Newman said it was at the bell, but no count came. So at the end of the day, Ruiz had lost a total of 3 points during the course of the contest. He lost 2 points in the second round for the 2 knockdowns he suffered. And then he lost another point in the 4th round for the bad penalty. And somehow, this was a tricky fight to score, but the rounds were competitive. Inexplicably to me, the referees had a unanimous decision for John Ruiz, with scores reading 114 to 111 on 2 cards, and 113 to 112 on the other card. I don't see how they came to those scores. I honestly thought that Golota beat Bird, but I really thought he beat Ruiz on this particular night, especially with the 3 points that Ruiz had taken from his tally. In order to get the scorecards that those judges got, you have to give Ruiz 9 rounds or 8 rounds, and that's not what happened in the fight I saw. But be it as it may, Golota once again lost, but once again kept his cool against a difficult foe in a heavyweight title fight. So now Golota drew with Bird, lost to Ruiz, but in the eyes of many, he was the unofficial, uncrowned, unified champion. So despite falling short in 2 heavyweight title bids back-to-back, Golota was still given a 3rd crack at a title, this time on May 21st, 2005, when he took on WBO title holder Layman Brewster. A lot of people thought he might win this one after his strong showings against Ruiz and Bird, but on this night it wasn't meant to be for Golota. Brewster had some good speed and some good power, and he caught Golota. Golota was caught trying to hook with a hooker. It didn't work out for him. He was down in the opening seconds of the fight. Brewster jumped on him immediately, landed another good barrage of punches. Golota would fall through the ropes, but to his credit, he did get up bravely and try to continue, but Brewster was too much for him, and Brewster dropped him again and finished the fight. And Layman Brewster took it to Golota and scored an impressive KO. So after suffering a devastating knockout at the hands of Brewster, Golota's time as a title contender seemed to be at an end, but he still wanted to give it another go. So after the Brewster fight, he bounced back, I think it was over 2 years later, where he would fight Jeremy Bates, and he'd stop Bates early, I think it was the 2nd round. And then he had another fight against Kevin McBride. And this was a difficult fight for Golota, and at this point in time, he had slowed down considerably. He didn't have the speed or the snap anymore, but he did manage to beat McBride, and I believe he even switched southpaw right before he did it. But then Golota got a chance to fight a local rival named Mike Mallow. Golota at this point in time was 40 years old. Mallow was 27, and they were looking to groom him into maybe a popular American heavyweight if they could. Golota was expected to lose this fight, and this one came on the undercard of Roy Jones Jr. and Felix Trinidad, a fight that always baffles me that it ever happened at the time that it did. But in any case, Mike Mallow came out and he did the same thing a lot of fighters tried to do against Golota. He came out with a bull charge, and he was throwing punches, trying to catch Golota cold, trying to take him out with something big. But it didn't work, and he didn't land anything big. So Golota kind of settled down a little bit and tried to get into a groove. And you can see in this fight, Golota was painfully slow, but he was landing his jabs, and he was starting to outbox Mallow. And Mike Mallow, inexplicably, was standing right at range, right at the end of Andrew's punching range. And he was eating punches, and this continued as the rounds went on. Golota was slow, but he was jabbing well. He started following it up with a big right hand, and he was hurting Mike Mallow more than once. Whenever Mallow was at range, it was like target practice for Golota. And then at some point, Mallow clipped Golota with a left hand after the bell, and that kind of got things going for him to the next 2 rounds. In the 4th and the 5th round, Mallow landed some big punches. He started clipping Golota with some good right hands. And then halfway through the 5th round, all of a sudden, Golota's eye starts to swell really badly. It came out of nowhere, and it happened really quick. And the fight continued. It was close rounds with not a lot of action, where Golota was started to land some body shots that were pretty good. By round 8, Golota's eye was really swelling badly, It was nearly shut. He had a strong finish in that round, and he started landing a bit better. And by the 9th round, Golota's eye was completely shut. Golota started really pounding on the younger fighter, who started seeming really tired, where the 40-year-old Golota seemed to be pacing himself very well. And he was landing punches right down the pipe, right between the guard down the center. In the 10th round, with the eye closed, another big round for Golota, and he started putting on a vintage Golota-like performance. He was much slower, he wasn't as strong, his punches didn't have the same snap, but Golota was doing something very special here. And with his eye completely shut, he was overcoming adversity. He was doing the type of things you always thought would have brought him a good deal of success if he could have done in his prime. But he was doing it on this night against his local rival. And then at some point during the 11th round, where it really started to look like Golota was putting on an amazingly brave effort despite being blinded, even Emmanuel Stewart, Emmanuel had this to say.
Well, Golota's legs, he's just slow, but his legs are there. But it's interesting, after most of all of his career, he's been a villain, and seeing his face like it is tonight and under these conditions, you know, I can't help but sympathize that he's become my hero tonight.
I'm here.
You look at all of the things that he's been through still, and he's still here fighting a fighter with his reflexes, meaning Golota's is gone, but he's still fighting a very smart fight.
So this was a really good win for Andrew Golota. When you look at his career, and you look at the struggles he had against Bowe, twice being disqualified, getting blown out by Lewis, quitting against Michael Grant and Mike Tyson, being out of the picture almost entirely, it seemed, before being miraculously resurrected in 2003 with the aid of Don King, where he really did, at this point, despite being past his physical prime, he started reaching his mental prime. And it's a shame in the sense that the two never gelled together. But by the time Golota's physical tools were eroding, in his fights with Bird, and his fight with Ruiz, he started mentally maturing. He was in there with some tough cookies who were frustrating fighters, where he didn't resort to the type of tactics that had made him fall short previously. This victory over Mike Mallow, a local rival who was supposed to use Golota as a stepping stone, where Golota's eye was completely swollen shut, and he overcame adversity, defeating his younger foe. I think this was the ultimate redemption for a career that largely ended in disappointment for Andrew Golota. And while his mental maturity may have came late in the game, I think this was a storybook ending for a very interesting career for a guy who brought a lot of entertainment to boxing fans over the years. And while he'd go on to have other losses after the fight with Molo, this was the moment to me that his whole career had built up to. He fell short, he was never a world champion, but he was involved in a lot of entertaining fights along the way. And I, for one, enjoyed watching it as it unfolded. This is Rummy. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, or even if you didn't enjoy it, if you made it this far, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching, and good night.